63% of the vote now in. Herschel Walker at 51, Raphael Warnock at 49. So
okay, actually, sorry to cut you off there, Andy. We do have updates. It looks like 67% now in, according to the Associated Press. So Warnock back.
It's a nice spa.
I know. I feel like I'm about to get a facial or a massage.
Oh, I wish.
You hear anything?
No.
Okay.
Right now, Fox 5 Atlanta is monitoring campaigning. Over $400 million spent, millions of votes cast, and it's all to decide who represents Georgia for the next 6 years. This is the Senate runoff election. This is election night, Georgia, on Fox 5.
Yeah, we have team coverage for you tonight. Fox 5's Rob D'Arienzo is live at Senator Raphael Warnock's watch party. Fox 5's Eric Perry is at Herschel Walker's watch party. And here in our studio are the meeting of the minds here, right? Our Fox 5 political panel. Right, exactly. They're going to give us analysis throughout the next hour.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Tom Haynes.
And I'm Christine Spiro. It's been a long road up to this point. But tonight's election decides who will represent the state of Georgia in the U.S. Senate for the next 6 years.
All right, let's take you to the leaderboard now and find out where things stand. This is what we have. It's been a horse race, to say the least. This has been going back and forth all night long, really, but with 44% of the precincts reporting across Georgia, Raphael Warnock leads narrowly by 50.3% to Herschel Walker's 49.7%. Now, both candidates are anxiously watching the results as they start to trickle in.
Yeah, like you said, they've been going back and forth at least the last 45 minutes or so. Incumbent Senator Democrat Raphael Warnock is hoping for his first full 6-year term.
Let's get out to Fox 5's Rob D'Arienzo, who's live at the Atlanta Marriott Marquis, where his watch party is being held right now. Rob, what is the mood like where you are?
Well, needless to say, there is a lot of energy in this room. There was just a loud roar of applause seeing those numbers come in that you just mentioned a moment ago. But it's a cautious anxiety. I want to take a step out of the way to show you what the room's looking like. Several people here tonight I spoke to flew all over the country to be here to door knock for Warnock and campaign on his behalf. Some as far as California and Oregon. I spoke to one woman from Southeast Atlanta who was standing in line to get in the room. Here's how she was feeling.
Right now, it seems like everyone's real peaceful. We're just trying to get our tickets so that we can get actually in the room. But I think that once we get inside and we start getting some returns, it'll be a jubilant atmosphere.
And one lady showed up with a illuminated Unite for Warnock sign. The line to get in here wrapped around the lobby of the Marriott Marquis, and you can hear just the loud music in the room. There's a DJ spinning records right now. As these numbers come in, again, there's a sense of excitement in the room, but also some nerves until the final results are called. That's the latest from here, live at the Marriott Marquis. Back to you guys.
All right, thanks so much, Rob. Republican challenger Herschel Walker also in Atlanta tonight as the final votes are being tallied.
Let's get out to Fox 5's Eric Perry, who's live at the College Football Hall of Fame, where his watch party is being held. Eric, this is a nail-biter. It's going back and forth. What's the mood like where you are?
Yeah, Tom, you talk about going back and forth. 1 minute you'll hear silence, the next minute you will just hear screams and cheers, and really people just kind of celebrating. I want to show you a little bit behind you. You see people coming in here, talking, reminiscing about Herschel Walker. We've talked to several different people here. I want to show you two people. They made the 4-hour journey from Savannah. They said they had to be here. I asked them about the excitement and really the record turnout we've seen at the polls. Take a listen to what they have to say.
Herschel Walker is truly a rags to riches story coming from Johnson County. It's really amazing. We've never really seen a type of candidate like this before. So the fact that people are jumping out of their seats to get out and wait in some occasions 1 or 2 hours in the polling line, that doesn't really surprise me.
500 votes may be the difference in this election. And then across the country, you're just seeing everybody really tuned in to what's going on.
And that is right there. Just really looking like it'll come down to really those really narrow votes here between. We've seen several different people here from the Republican Party. A little bit earlier before we came on the air, we saw the leader of the Cobb County Republican Party. They had a couple of comments there, then went back to some music. We have not seen Herschel Walker just yet, but we know he is watching. And somewhere here where many of fans are gathered, they're watching and they're waiting, and many of them are still hopeful. Of course, we'll keep you updated as soon as we learn more information here at downtown Atlanta. I'm Eric Perry, Fox 5 News.
All right, we will continue to watch those numbers as well. Eric, thank you. Now that the polls have closed and the vote count is underway, what should we be watching for as the night goes on? Well, for that, let's bring in our Fox 5 political panel. We have political analyst Lori Geary, Democratic strategist Theron Johnson, CEO of Paramount Consulting, and Republican strategist Brian Robinson, the president of Robinson Republic. Hi, guys. We're at it again.
I know.
Yeah.
We are.
The last election of the season. Lori, let's start with you. What are you looking at tonight as those polls closed at 7 o'clock tonight? What were some of the first things you were looking for as an indication of where this race is going?
Well, we knew that Senator Warnock would come out, out of the gate winning because of those early vote numbers that we were seeing. So that proved, and as the night has worn on, we've seen this getting tighter and tighter. We actually saw Walker actually go ahead of Warnock, but now they're bouncing back and forth. But I will tell you, what we're waiting on are these Metro Atlanta votes. DeKalb County is less than 50% of the vote in. Fulton County, I think, has, at last check, about 60% of the vote in, and Cobb County is about 25%. So once these Democratic counties come in, we're going to see, I think, Senator Warnock's lead get even more than it is now. One thing to note, though, there have been some surprises. Like in Columbia County, I got a call from somebody. They said there were 1,000 more people who voted today in Columbia County compared to Election Day, and there's only one race on the ballot.
Yeah, what surprises you about it? That the engagement, or the
fact that more people showed up in this runoff than they did actually a general election with so many people on the ballot?
Yeah, there was hope, Brian, that with the governor's help, because he won his race handily in the general election, that maybe with his help, that would give Herschel Walker a boost. Are you seeing any indications of that just yet?
I don't think that we will know that, and perhaps we'll have some exit polling that'd be great that would tell us what factors went into people's decision. A pathway for Walker, I would say really the only pathway for Walker, was to get strong Kemp, soft Walker voters back to the polls. We know that Governor Kemp was the major magnet for Republican voters up and down the ballot, and he helped carry those statewide officers down the ballot over the finish line toward a win. But people who went and it wasn't for Walker, they perhaps weren't excited about voting for Walker. Governor Kemp was the most influential voice that they could hear from. And Kemp went in there and got the Walker campaign on the right message. He was focused on an economic message, talking about inflation. That was where it needed to be and where it needed to stay throughout these 4 weeks.
Yeah. Theron, your take tonight as you're seeing kind of these numbers flip-flop, because Walker had at 7 o'clock a 55% lead with more than 100,000 votes ahead of Herschel Walker. And then we've seen that number dwindle and flip-flop at some point. Kind of give us your initial take on all of that.
Well, I talked to many people from the Warnock campaign pretty much all week, but today I went over earlier into the Marriott Marquise, and really the optimism there was, in the room. And I know that they had actually banked enough votes in the early voting to basically be victorious tonight. What's interesting, though, is that, you hear Lori talk about Columbia County, right? And there were some other Democratic counties like Muskogee County, where we had a lot of voters who did not vote for whatever reason in November actually come back out and vote in this race. The one thing that the Warnock campaign did very successfully leading up into the final days is that it was all this sort of media attention about all these Democrats are voting, and then if you didn't vote early, then maybe your vote didn't count. And so you saw them laser-like focus on making sure that everyone understood that today was the election day and that they needed to have the turnout. Lastly, I would say this, look, the one thing that's the difference maker in this campaign, I think ultimately will lead to a defeat for Walker, is that the last 10 to 12 days of his campaign, he spent dodging the media. versus Warnock spending every single second he had traveling around the entire state of Georgia on the bus, talking to voters, and not just talking to Democratic voters, trying to reach out to the moderate independents. And I think that was a key strategy for that campaign.
How much do you think, though, because the Democrats already have the U.S. Senate locked up, essentially, winning this would just kind of pad that number. Do you think there's a concern at all that people are thinking, okay, well, the Democrats already won, I don't really need to come back out and vote for Reverend Warnock? Do you think there's a concern that there's some people who might not have voted because of that?
Well, I think the one thing, if you look at the average age of our U.S. senators, right, the women and men who serve this country, it's 66 or 67 or above. The second thing is that we've had some Democrats, Manchin and Sinema, who don't always necessarily support the Democratic agenda. And so what the Warnock campaign was really talking about is that, hey, things happen. People may decide to retire. Folks may not decide, hey, this is not what I want to do anymore. And also when, we have some Democratic U.S. senators decide to side with Republicans, we need to send Senator Warnock back to Washington to make sure that he can carry out his agenda.
And can I say, one thing that I don't think was messaged to Georgians by either side was that there is a huge difference between a 50-50 Senate, which is what it will be if Walker wins, and a 51-49 Senate, which is what it will be if Warnock wins.
Lay it out then. So,
well, with Warnock in the Senate, it's going to make Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema of Arizona much less powerful than they are today. They'll be able to steamroll them to some degree. It'll make it much easier for the Democrats to confirm federal judges, which is a huge goal of theirs, whereas Manchin and Sinema may stand up to more far-left judges that might come before the Senate. So having Walker there would make a difference as far as holding the line for conservative values and the things that are most important to Republican voters. So it would matter. And plus, look, this is a 6-year term. It may not determine the majority in 2023, but it might in 2025. It might in 2027. This is a long-term commitment. This isn't a date. This is a marriage.
So the difference, though, here is, Christine, this is the Republican message, right? They're talking about power in the U.S. Senate. The Warnock campaign was talking about Medicaid expansion, economic prosperity, making sure you feel safe in your county when we have gang violence going on right now. So it wasn't about, hey, send me back to Washington so I can have an upper hand on Republicans. It was like, no, send me back to Washington so I can continue to deliver for the state and make sure that I bring back the resources to make sure that you can actually love to live in the state. And so to me, I think that was the closing message because, yeah, we want the power. Democrats want the votes. But Senator Warnock went to Washington, was a bipartisan senator. Yeah, he supported President Biden 96% of the time because the things he supported was good things. But, the long list of things that he actually pushed back on, I think that's how he made an appeal to these independent and moderates. And so the Walker campaign, to me, really didn't have a message other than, hey, send me up there to stop Joe Biden. Senator Warnock is saying, hey, send me back up there so I can finish the job and what I've been trying to do. And I think that was the clear distinction between the messages of the campaign.
All right, more to come from our panel. Let's get an update on where things stand numbers-wise. We've been telling you it's been going back and forth for the last hour or so. So let's go to Fox 5's Tom Haynes, who has a county-by-county breakdown of where things are right now. It went from 50-50 to, Warnock inching up a little bit.
Does it get any more razor sharp than this, Christine? Well, here's where we stand now. Herschel Walker, 50%. Raphael Warnock, 50%. Only a few thousand votes separate this thing right now. So what we're zeroing in on, what Lori was talking about earlier, is Metro Atlanta. And if you're a Democrat running for statewide office in Georgia, I don't care if it's the Senate or the governorship or any statewide office, you are focused on Metro Atlanta. That is why we're watching these numbers as they come in places like Fulton and in DeKalb County, where we're not getting a lot of return right now. But if you're the Raphael Warnock campaign, you are watching these counties as well as up here in Cobb County, the returns come in. We got a lot of the early votes earlier in the evening, and that's what pushed Raphael Warnock so far ahead in this race. But things have evened out as some of the outlying counties in the state have come in. But this is the gold for Raphael Warnock, these metro Atlanta counties. It's interesting to kind of look at some of the polls that have come in earlier. We had our Fox 5 Insider Advantage poll, which only had this race spread out by about 3 points. It was in the margin of error. So what's going to be interesting tonight is to see how that spread lands. In other words, how far separated are these two candidates going to be? Let's take a look at a landmark poll, which also came in a little wider. 5-point spread between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, 52 to 47. Will that reflect itself in tonight's numbers? We're going to be watching these metro Atlanta counties, as we talked about earlier, and we're also going to be watching some of these outlying counties and compare it to where the general election stood and how Governor Kemp performed as opposed to how Herschel Walker performed, how Kemp's involvement after his election in the runoff election, did it make much of a difference? We're going to be breaking down all of those statistics as we go along. Christine.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom. And as we know, Georgia has had several high-profile runoff elections over the last few years, but could we see changes in the future? Here's what the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, had to say about that.
You have to understand, 4 years ago, I was in a runoff, but we didn't have the same issues. It was a 4-week runoff, when I was there 4 years ago. So that was a state runoff. But what we didn't have then is we did not have the verifiable paper ballot. We didn't require the counties to do an audit of a race. And so when you start throwing in that, risk limiting audit after the general, and then you also throw in all the other issues that you have, it just gets to be an awful lot. So there's a lot of different options that they could look at. I think at the end of the day, that's something that we would encourage the General Assembly to take a look at.
So our panel is back now. Based on kind of what the Secretary of State is saying about that, what are your initial thoughts, Lori?
Well, my initial thoughts are, Republicans, if you look at the history in Georgia, Republicans have always been favored in runoffs up until last year when you had former President Donald Trump telling people to stay home. Right. But if you go back to 1992 when it was Wyche Fowler and Paul Coverdale came out on top. You had Saxby Chambliss and Jim Martin in 2008. Saxby Chambliss won. So especially in the U.S. Senate races, Republicans tend to do much better. That all changed last year, so maybe the Republicans who are in power now might take a look at this, but I don't see a runoff scenario changing.
But what was the difference this time around without the balance of power? And Brian, I know you mentioned that it does make a difference who gets elected tonight. What was the difference this time that so many people, record number of people, turned out in a runoff election where the consequences weren't as great as the last time around?
I think there was a lot of interest in this runoff, and I think the fact that you had Governor Kemp back out, messaging for and really carrying the message of Herschel Walker this time around rather than Herschel Walker himself. I think that drummed up a lot of interest, a lot of support. There still is a lot of interest in what's happening in Washington, D.C. And I think that still brings out there was a lot of money spent on this race. I mean, if you look at the numbers, Senator Warnock out fundraised Herschel Walker, I think it was 3-1, and spent that kind of money, the high dollar. You couldn't turn on a TV without seeing a political ad. You couldn't open your mailbox without getting mailers in. So, and I think the Saturday voting, too, that issue really drummed up support among Democrats to say, you're not going to silence us, we want to vote.
Yeah, I think, look, when I see Secretary of State Raffensperger talking about going to the legislature and trying to really decrease some of the lines that we saw, Tom and Christine, I'm going to make a bold sort of proposal here. One thing that the Secretary of State is not talking about is that one of the reasons why we saw the long lines is that a lot of poll workers who we depend on every single election actually didn't come back out to work. And so I think that what the legislators should be talking about, and this is just a little piece of advice for a new legislator going in, a woman or man, just that we need to incentivize our poll workers more. We need to pay them more, give them a reason to want to show up. And then lastly, Lori brings up a really good point. The Republicans and the Democrats, we got to get on the offense about this. They tried to actually restrict voting in Georgia. They tried to actually take days away from runoff vote. They went so far to waste taxpayers' money to file baseless lawsuits. Whereas you saw the Warnock campaign and other groups come out and say, hold on, guys, let's make sure that we actually leave it up to local control, local governments to decide whether or not they wanted to have that voting. And so I want to commend those counties who basically went against Secretary of State Raffensperger and other state leaders, Republicans who stayed silent, and actually gave the people the opportunity to vote. And so I do think that Senator Warnock is going to win this race tonight. It's very tight. But you're going to see Democrats really put a lot of pressure on the Secretary of State's office to make sure that when we have these runoffs in the future, that we have everything prepared and making sure that we're anticipating these long lines. And then, Tom, you asked a question. Why all of a sudden the Republicans stopped winning runoffs in Georgia? Well, it's really simple. Democrats, we got tired of getting our butts kicked in runoff, and so we learned how to get our voters back out.
Is that the Stacey Abrams effort
well,
to turn out the vote?
It's not just
I mean, she laid a lot of the groundwork for that.
Yeah, she did, but here we go. It's a new day, right?
Okay.
Let's give Senator Warnock some credit. All right, this man is battle tested. He was in a runoff just less than 2 years ago.
Yes.
So the minute that he went on that microphone in the general election and said, all right, guys, you're going to see me on your television screens for Thanksgiving, his team was basically ready to get their votes back out and to make a broad appeal to the middle. So, yeah, Stacey played a part, but there's so many other Democrats out there that have been working hard for this moment, and I think that's why you're seeing these numbers so high.
I think Brad Raffensperger was making an excellent point here. He's saying, one, nobody wants 9-week runoffs again. Like, nobody. That was miserable to live through back in 2020 and 2021. And the 4-week runoff is much more manageable for voters, and it contains the spending a little bit. We don't need $800 million. $400 million was just fine. That sufficed. But it's hard to administer an election in that short a period of time. It takes a while to confirm the first election, the general election, and then you got to print ballots. Then you got to get absentee ballots out, all in a very short period of time. And then lay it over a holiday where Theron's talking about workers. I don't care if you're paying $300, $400 a day. Nobody wants to work on Thanksgiving week. They got other things to do. So it was really more of a workforce issue more than a voter access issue. So I think that we do need to look at a way to kind of find a third way. Nobody wants a 9-week runoff. Okay. And one thing Raffensperger mentioned was an automatic runoff, having ranked choice voting. It is something that I would love to see happen in Georgia.
This 50 plus 1. Yeah. Why can't it be just who got the most votes?
Winner takes all.
And call it a day.
Which is what it is in most states. But I still believe in majority rule, and I think that the automatic runoff where you go, I really like Christine to be my number one choice, but I want Tom. If it's not Christine, I'd like for it to be Tom. And then you vote that way. And that it leads to candidates running cleaner, nicer campaigns because you want to get the second place votes of your opponent's supporters.
But we wouldn't have the results of the election the same night, which is what people want. It would take look at Alaska. It would take forever.
It does take a while.
California, they're still counting.
That's got to get fixed. That is a downside.
But look at the history of discounting, right? How did we come up with this runoff in Georgia? It was because a Republican state elected official lost his race. All right. And and Brian knows what I'm talking about. And so then he put in this runoff system, which back then Republicans knew if you have a runoff and you ask black and brown voters to come out for a second time, it gave the advantage to the Republican Party. And so I'm here to say, look, I disagree with Brian. I think Brad Raffensperger basically should incentivize workers more. And not only this, you've been a Secretary of State for 4 years. You knew the runoff was possibly coming. So this whole thing about you only had 4 weeks to prepare for it, do your job. I mean, you have a big statewide organization to make sure that people are prepared for these long lines. And so, look, we're going to talk about Warnock and Herschel tonight, but don't worry. Come after this election, Brad Raffensperger and every single Republican who won office, they're going to have to be accountable to the people.
So the 50 plus 1 is going to become a conversation again in the legislature?
I think, listen, if
not in the Republican.
I was about to say.
Republicans don't want to do away with the runoff. Now, ranked choice voting, and this is what me and Brian agree. You've seen some Republicans talk about it. The problem with that is I think that it's going to be very hard to convince Democrats that you want to basically cherry pick, ranked choice. And how does it not sort of dilute the ability for people to actually want to run for office, right? Because what happens is that if Tom has more money than Christine, but Christine wants to run, and you basically are able just to saturate the market in your primary, to me, I think Democrats are going to have some real valid concerns about that.
You do have more money than me, though. So, that might be a problem.
I spend more money than you. That's the problem.
I do need to correct one thing. Theron is right. I do know who he's talking about as far as who put in the runoff system in Georgia. It was in the mid-1960s, and it wasn't a Republican. It was a Democrat, because at the time, everybody in Georgia was a Democrat.
No, I don't think that's true. But
Mark Groover was a Democrat. Everybody in the legislature was a Democrat in the mid-60s.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
all right.
Okay.
Well, he was white. How about that?
The debate will continue here.
That is true.
So we'll come back to our panel here throughout the next few minutes.
And we're going to talk about voter turnout, which was huge in this runoff election. We're going to break down the numbers on just how many people came out for the Senate runoff, and hearing from the Secretary of State's office, speaking of, next.
The news moves fast, and so do you. So take the news with you. You can scan the code right here to download the Fox 5 News app now. Inside the app, hit the Watch Live button to stream Fox 5 News wherever you are. Get alerts for the biggest stories and the latest news headlines, weather coverage, sports breakdowns, even I-Team investigations. So what are you waiting for? Scan the code now and take the news with you. Download the Fox 5 News app now.
Get the power of the Fox 5 Storm Team in the palm of your hand. Scan the code right here to download the Fox 5 Storm Team app. Inside the app, you'll find everything you need to plan your day and keep your family safe. Set your location to get instant notifications for weather near you and even get life-saving alerts when severe weather threatens. From your hourly forecast to a full 10-day breakdown, it is all at your fingertips. Scan the code now and take the Fox 5 Storm Team with you.
Welcome back to election night in Georgia. This is the night we've been waiting for, right? Well, after seeing all these weeks of commercials and
we
whatnot.
Talked about it over our turkey.
That's
and
right.
We finally made it, right? Here's where things stand right now. Let's take a look. Raphael Warnock, Herschel Walker, neck and neck in this race. It's been going back and forth really all night long. Where things stand now, Raphael Warnock taking 50.4% of the vote. Herschel Walker, 49.6%. A lot of these counties still reporting, and that's going to make all the difference, especially here in Metro Atlanta for the Raphael Warnock folks.
The Secretary of State expects when all votes are counted, more than 3 million people will have cast their ballots in the race for the next U.S. Senator from Georgia. That's compared to 4 million votes cast last month.
Nearly 1.9 million people in our state voted early. Today, more than 2,700 polling locations were open statewide. There were a couple of election problems in Henry County, but they were quickly solved.
We are seeing, again, no lines, pretty sizable turnout with the number we're looking at right now. We walked in thinking we'd at least go over 1 million. We're guaranteed to go over 1,000,001, probably approaching 1,000,002.
Voters Fox 5 spoke to say that they didn't run into any major issues other than long lines and long waits, but to them, it was quite worth it. With the race being so close, turnout was key in this election, so let's get back to our panel.
Lori, talk to us about why that turnout was so key and why each campaign needed a certain amount of people to turn out and why.
Well, I think if you look at the strategy, I mean, Senator Warnock not only had to get his Democrats back out to vote, but he also had to get some of those Republicans back out to vote for a Democrat. That's not easy to do. And I think Walker had to get his conservative base out, and I think he was also relying on Governor Kemp to get the more moderate Republicans out. So that was the strategy on both of their sides. Look, these numbers are so close, they're flipping now in Warnock's favor because we're seeing more votes come in from Metro Atlanta. So we're seeing Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett coming in now. So I assume that Warnock's numbers will rise even a little bit higher.
Brian, let's talk about the Donald Trump factor here. I mean, he has been present in this race, not only in the general, but in this runoff election. And Herschel Walker's connection to Trump. He's a Trump-endorsed candidate. Trump put him up to run. Trump announced he's running for president a few weeks ago. I mean, does Trump and the association help or harm Herschel Walker?
Well, it certainly helps in a primary. It does not help in a general, and the empirical evidence on that is very clear. That's why you did not see President Trump on Georgia soil holding any rallies in the last few months, particularly not even in the runoff. As I said on our Fox 5 show, Road to November, when Trump announced, it would be better for everybody involved on the Republican side if the 24 cycle began after the 22 cycle ends, which doesn't happen until Georgia says it does every year because of our runoff elections. So Trump's approval rating in Georgia is below 40. His disapproval is above 50. That speaks for itself. And what happens in Metro Atlanta? Metro Atlanta voters are the deciding voters at this point in history in Georgia. And it is largely white, college-educated, affluent voters in the northern suburbs who have switched back and forth between the two parties in recent cycles. They don't like Donald Trump. And those voters, whatever they did in early voting and what they did today, they're the ones who are going to decide who's going to Washington when all these votes are counted.
It was interesting too, Theron. I was seeing some numbers as well showing the number of young people who have come out to vote, and a lot of them have voted in favor of Senator Warnock.
Well, one of the things that I've been sort of saying for a long time is that you got to build the right coalition of voters. And you're right, Christine. What we found in November is that the young vote was down. And so we saw a little bit of an uptick in early voting. But I think that, look, Brian knows this. I always try to market to the college-educated, disaffected Republican suburban white woman, right? But I got to give a lot of credit, if these numbers hold up, to a lot of African-American, particularly women and men, because we got a bad rep in doing the general. It was like, hey, if African-American men show up, you know, Stacey will win, and it's all this attention on the African-American vote. I think that the ability for Senator Warnock to not only turn out his base, but do it in a way where he really went more on the attack about how Herschel Walker was unfit to go to the U.S. Senate for 6 years. And still doing the puppies, no Christmas lights this time, but definitely Alvin came back and we saw him walking the dog. But you look at his direct-to-camera appeal of talking about, hey, I have values, you can trust me, I have character, I'm competent, I can do all these things and continue to work for you in Washington. And then you look at Walker still on the attack and disappeared from the media for like 2 weeks. To me, I think that the ability for him to close the campaign in a very inspiring message shows that I think the people said, all right, you know what, let's send him back.
Theron, are you saying that Walker was a much weaker candidate than Warnock? And if that's what you're saying, how do you explain this race, which is like razor sharp and razor close?
Tom, let me just say this, and I've been holding this back, and I'm going to let it out tonight. You know, I think that Herschel Walker was an embarrassment for some African Americans. No, hold on, let me finish. Okay. But I think that the majority of the people who are voting for Herschel Walker are people who are more controlled about what Brian said, which is they want to basically get control of the U.S. Senate, and they want to push back on Biden, and they just want a Republican to go to Washington to try to basically stop whatever they want them to stop. And so I think that if you compare these two gentlemen, apples to apples, education, commitment to Georgia, who's lived in Georgia the longest, who's actually done more for Georgia voters, it's no comparison. However, you got to give Herschel Walker some credit. I mean, being a celebrity and being a Heisman Trophy winner and being an NFL player, that's definitely help people. I mean, I see it when I'm out. I'm not comparing myself to Herschel Walker, but because I'm on television, people definitely want to talk to me. They want to know what I think. They want to be around me. And so I think that a little bit of the celebrity actually helped him, but also I think a lot of people now have been desensitized about their elected officials and people who are running for office, because we saw a lot of stuff that Trump brought out in 2016 and he still became the president.
Well, this election was supposed to be a referendum on Biden, right? Yeah. But we didn't really see that. I mean, we're in a runoff right now. So it makes me wonder, what really are the issues people are voting for? Is it the economy, or is it the economy and abortion? Is it the economy and democracy? What is driving people at this point?
It's a good question, because I think, you heard some on the issues, but the media attention was all about like the power in Washington, and then there was so much attention on when Walker did speak. We heard about we talked about this last night. We heard about werewolves and vampires.
Yeah.
Some of these kind of odd stories. I wouldn't call them gaffes, because they weren't gaffes. They were actually stories that he was talking about. So there was so much attention on that. Where Warnock did stick to the issues, right? He talked about inflation, the economy, student loans. The Warnock strategy, I thought, was also very effective in going after the young voters. Something that we don't always see, because it's skeptical on whether or not they will come out, right? Yeah. But he visited all of the college campuses, and you can't discount former President Barack Obama coming to Georgia to get out the Democratic vote. I mean, if there's one, probably the most popular Democrat in the country, it is him. It is Barack Obama.
Real quick, Brian, as sort of the right-leaning panelists here, will this, or does this race sort of cement Georgia as a swing state that is starting to kind of lean left now, right? I mean, Biden won it, and we have 2 Democrat senators. So what's going on?
And I would say we also just reelected by very wide margins an entire Republican slate to governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. And another little thing that no one's talked about, if you look at the Republicans who got the highest margins in the general election, it was the state school superintendent and the insurance commissioner. Those are basically generic ballot races. People don't know who they're voting for. They're voting for a party in those races. And so in the generic ballot races, the Republicans did even better than Brian Kemp. So there is some strong fundamentals for the Republicans that remain here. Here's the underlying message. What you saw in 2020 was a rejection of Donald Trump here in Georgia. I am shocked at how well Republicans have rebounded here. I am shocked at how strong the fundamentals of the Republican base is here based on the general election. I feel really good about where we are going into 2024 and 2026. And my friends here, Theron and Laurie, can tell you, I've been saying forever, Theron's heard me say it for years, we're about to be a Democrat majority state. Somehow we have stopped that in its tracks.
Some analysts were more impressed by Kemp's victory over Stacey Abrams than Ron DeSantis' 20-point victory down in Florida.
100%. We're now a majority minority state. Nobody talks about that, right? Brian Kemp got reelected with a multiracial coalition. Florida is now 60+% white. So it's much easier for a Republican to win in these partisan dynamics than in Georgia. Georgia Republicans have shown the rest of the country how you build a multiracial partisan coalition.
All right, guys. Thanks. We'll be back to you. As a reminder, here's where the leaderboard stands right now. We're still close. Raphael Warnock, 50.1. Herschel Walker, 49.9. How is this race going to evolve tonight? When we come back, we're going to dive deeper into the results, break down how these counties are voting.
The news moves fast, and so do you. So take the news with you. You can scan the code right here to download the Fox 5 News app now. Inside the app, hit the Watch Live button to stream Fox 5 News wherever you are. Get alerts for the biggest stories and the latest news headlines, weather coverage, sports breakdowns, even I-Team investigations. So what are you waiting for? Scan the code now and take the news with you. Download the Fox 5 News app now.
Get the power of the Fox 5 Storm Team in the palm of your hand. Scan the code right here to download the Fox 5 Storm Team app. Inside the app, you'll find everything you need to plan your day and keep your family safe. Set your location to get instant notifications for weather near you and even get life-saving alerts when severe weather threatens. From your hourly forecast to a full 10-day breakdown, it is all at your fingertips. Scan the code now and take the Fox 5 Storm Team with you.
Welcome back. I'm Tom Haynes. Joining me, Fox 5 political analyst Lori Geary, to go over the map, some of these counties. We're digging into the latest poll numbers as more and more results come in. You mentioned earlier, Lori, on the panel that Democrats, when they run for statewide office, focus heavily on Metro Atlanta. Talk about sort of where we're at right now and sort of reporting these results.
We still don't have 100% of the results in for Metro Atlanta. So you're talking about Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett counties. We're expecting those are really strong Warnock counties. And
this is Fulton alone, 82-17.
Yeah. So the more votes that come in from those 4 core counties, especially Metro Atlanta, those counties, you'll see Warnock's numbers go up higher. But I am looking at some of the analysis, and it looks like voter turnout in Metro Atlanta in these counties is down about 12% compared to some of the rural counties where it's down about 6% compared to the November election.
Is Warnock performing as well in Metro Atlanta as he did the last time around?
He is, and the other really interesting point is that Walker is not performing as well as he did on election day in the rural counties. So he's down by about 0.3%. Remember, he lost by 1 percentage point. So he's got to be up higher than Warnock.
Now, you were looking at Baldwin as kind of a bellwether. Talk to me about that.
The reason why we look at Baldwin is because Baldwin is really split. It's 50-50. It's 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. And so right now, Warnock is leading by 1 percentage point in Baldwin County. That could be a signal of how we end up tonight.
Such interesting analysis. Lori, we'll keep talking about this as the night goes on. Christine, I'll send it back to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom and Lori. We want to go back to our panel for just some final thoughts. We have Brian Robinson and Theron Johnson here as we're wrapping up our webcast here. Theron, I'll start with you. Kind of final thoughts. I asked you guys earlier, do you think this election will be called tonight?
Yes, but this election is close. I mean, we're sitting here watching the numbers coming in. You guys are showing 62% of the vote in, and now it's actually flipped. Walker has actually got the lead.
Yes.
And so I think that the election will be called tonight. But right now, just to take you inside the campaigns, I mean, all of that data crunching, people are looking at their laptop screens. They've ID'd their voters. They're definitely calling around to their workers that were in the election offices to see how many votes are out.
That it could stay this close for some time. And if that's the case, it's anybody's game. You know, we knew coming into today that if the turnout on election day got to be close to 1.5 million, Walker was going to have a darn good chance. Well, we got to 1.4. That's pretty good. And if it had been closer to 1 million, Warnock, we'd have called it for Warnock already. The numbers got high enough to give Walker a chance. He had to get about 60% of election day vote, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Do you think that 3 to 5 point polling spread going into this is going to hold tonight, or do you think it's going to be much closer than that?
I want to see the next tranche before that would have been my guess, Tom, before I started talking to some elections officials, and they're not so sure that's the case. I think this may be closed for some time.
Well, you got to remember what's being counted right now are the day of votes, right?
Yeah.
And we know that those are going to favor Walker.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's why that 100,000 vote lead at the very beginning of the night has dwindled, because the same day votes are are being counted, which favor Republicans normally.
And Barron can be the one to say this, but there's still a good number of votes from DeKalb and Fulton, and even election day votes are going to favor
no matter
Warnock
what
in those counties.
DeKalb, come on, DeKalb.
DeKalb, 80. You know,
80-20.
I can account for two. I can account for 2 Walker votes in DeKalb County that I'm pretty sure of.
Right.
But 85.
You and your wife?
Yes. Yeah, I can't attest for anyone else.
We need it.
But it's going to be an 85% Warnock County at the end of the day, no matter what.
All right, guys, thanks so much. It's going to be an interesting night all the way to the end, certainly, because it's going to be so close. Panelists, thank you. And before we go, one last check of the results so far. Walker, 50.1. Warnock, 49.9. Boy, this keeps moving.
What's closer than razor thin? I mean, can we come up with another?
Razor sharp.
Razor sharp.
Split a hair. We'll come up with some
more. Split end, for sure. Thanks so much for joining us for this special edition of Election Night in Georgia. We also want to give a special thank you to, again, our panelists for their thoughts and insights.
But, of course, the night is far from over. Fox 5 Atlanta is going to continue to bring you the results on air and online. Our panel is going to be back, too. Our Election Night coverage continues in just